There is a key in my hand that I have not touched in 37 years. It is small and heavy and cold, the way old brass goes cold when it has been sitting in the dark, and it sits in my palm now with the particular weight of a thing that was meant to be forgotten. I found it this afternoon at the bottom of my old woodworking toolbox, underneath a folded chamois cloth and 3 generations of chisels, and the moment my fingers closed around it, I felt something shift in my chest that I cannot fully name. The toolbox smelled of linseed oil and oak shavings, the way it always has, the way I imagine it always will, and there was the key, small and cold, and carrying 37 years of silence inside it, like a stone carries water. I am standing at the top of the basement stairs right now. The door is slightly open. The light is off below. Eleanor is at her archive meeting on the other side of the city, and she will not be home for another 2 hours. And something in me, something I thought I had trained out of myself in 50 years of marriage, is standing very still and listening to the house breathe. She asked me not to open it. She said it in a voice I have never heard from her in all our years together, and I have heard Eleanor's voice in every register a human being possesses. I heard her voice when she laughed so hard at a bad joke I told on our second date that she nearly choked on her wine. I heard it when she held our neighbor's hand through a loss that leveled that family. I heard it when she was frightened, and when she was furious, and when she was so tired she could barely carry it anymore. But that voice on the basement stairs, low and soft, and cracked, right down the middle, was a voice I did not know she owned. Not angry, not frightened, something older than either of those things. Heartbroken. And I put the key back. That evening I put it back in the chamois cloth, and I closed the toolbox and I stood in my workshop for a long time, with my hands on the bench, and I breathed. But I did not forget the key. And now it is Thursday again, and the house is quiet, and I am standing at the top of these stairs. Let me stop right here a moment, before I go on. I am not a man who is used to talking this way, out loud, to people I cannot see. I have spent 75 years keeping most of what matters closest to my chest. So if you are with me right now, do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what city, what part of the world. It matters to me to know you are out there. Tell me what time it is where you are. And if what I am about to say is reaching you, leave me a like. Subscribe if you have not yet, because there is a new story here every single day. I promise you I have more of these in me than you might think. Right. Let me go back to the stairs. My name is Richard Ashcroft. I'm 75 years old. I was born in the 3rd week of January in a year when the winter came early and hard across the north, and York has been my home for all the years that count. I am a retired cabinet maker. I spent 40 years building things out of oak and ash and walnut. Bespoke pieces for families across Yorkshire who wanted something that would outlast them, and I believe I gave them that. My hands are a craftsman's hands, wide and scarred across the knuckles, with the particular roughness that comes from a life spent working wood with proper tools rather than machines. My hair went silver in my early 60s, and I let it because Eleanor said it suited me. And I have learned over the decades that Eleanor is usually right about these things. I live with my wife in a Georgian townhouse on St. Mary's in Bootham. We have been in this house for more than 45 years, which means Eleanor has spent more of her life here than anywhere else she has ever called home, and so have I. The ceilings are high and the floors are original oak boards that creak in all the familiar places, and the walls in the kitchen are painted a particular shade of deep cream that Eleanor chose in our 2nd year here and has never changed. Because why would you change something that is right? The house faces north and gets the best of whatever light York's sky is willing to give, which in January is not much, but in June is more than you could ever ask for. Eleanor is 71. She was a museum archivist for 33 years at the Yorkshire Museum, and she retired 4 years ago, and I thought retirement might undo her, because she is not a woman who knows how to be idle. But she found her way. She volunteers now, cataloging historical family collections across the county, which is exactly the kind of work that suits her. Eleanor has always understood that the past is not dead. It is simply waiting to be properly organized. She goes at it with the same methodical care she brought to everything in her professional life, and she comes home from those archive sessions with that particular light in her eyes that tells me she has found something worth keeping. She is the finest person I have ever known. I want to say that plainly, without sentimentality and without qualification. I have known her for 52 years. I have been married to her for 49 of those years, and I am still, at 75, quietly astonished that she chose me. I noticed the basement visits 5 weeks ago. It began on a Thursday evening. I was in the sitting room with a book, and I heard the basement door open and close. The door has a particular sound, heavy and slightly reluctant, the way old wood sounds when it has settled into its frame over decades and requires a deliberate pull to move. I heard it, and I thought nothing of it. The basement is part of the house. Eleanor uses it for storage, as I do. But she came back upstairs carrying nothing, empty-handed. And when she came through the sitting room door, she smiled at me with a warmth that was entirely genuine and entirely meant to redirect my attention. And she asked me whether I would like a cup of tea, and I said yes, and that was the evening. Then it happened again on the Friday, and again on the Monday. I am a cabinet maker. I have spent my working life reading grain, reading the subtle variations in a piece of wood that tell you where it has been stressed, where it is solid, where there is something hidden running beneath the surface that will determine how it behaves under pressure. You learn to see things in your trade that you cannot unlearn. You develop an eye for the detail that does not quite fit, and I had noticed, over the past 6 months or so, that Eleanor sometimes looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read, something tender and careful and attentive, the way you look at something you are afraid of losing. I had mentioned it to myself in the privacy of my own thoughts, and then put it aside. We are both in our 70s. We both carry the ordinary accumulation of years, the slower mornings, the afternoon naps I once swore I would never take, the reading glasses on every surface of the house, the particular stillness that settles into a life when the great noise of working and raising and striving finally quiets. I had assumed the expression on Eleanor's face was simply part of that, the tenderness of growing older alongside someone, the awareness that the years ahead are fewer than the years behind, and that the ones ahead ought to be held gently. But the basement visits were something specific, something intentional. The locksmith's words came back to me 3 weeks in. They came back the way old information surfaces when you least expect it, surfacing from somewhere below the conscious mind, sudden and clear. He had been a short, businesslike man, the locksmith who installed the floor safe when we renovated the basement in our 12th year in the house. He had set the dial and handed us 2 keys. He said, and I remember the particularity of his phrasing, always keep them separately. You never know which one you will need and when. Eleanor had taken her key immediately. She keeps important things in her dressing table, in the small lacquered box with the broken hinge that she has been meaning to repair for 15 years and has not yet gotten round to, and that is exactly where she put it that afternoon. I put mine in the toolbox, and over the following years, as the safe became simply a part of the house's architecture, a thing that was there without being particularly relevant, I stopped thinking about the key altogether. I had not opened the toolbox for close to 8 years. I opened it last Tuesday because I needed a specific chisel, a 1-inch bevel edge that I knew I had, and could not find in my workshop rack, and there beneath the chamois cloth was the key. There are people out there who know exactly what I mean when I say that an ordinary object can carry the weight of an entire life. If you have ever reached into a drawer and pulled out something that put you back 20 years in an instant, something small and plain that turned out to be a door, write to me in the comments. Tell me where you are. Tell me what the thing was, if you want to. Those small objects are worth talking about. Leave me a like while you're there. And subscribe, because tomorrow there is another story here, and it will carry something true inside it as well. I am not a suspicious man. I want to be clear about that. In 52 years of knowing Eleanor, in 49 years of marriage, there has not been a single day when I did not trust her. Trust is not a thing you perform in a marriage. It is something that gets built one ordinary day at a time, and Eleanor and I have been building it since we were young enough to be careless about it. She is the most honest person I have ever known. Honest in the way that means she will tell you the difficult thing, even when the easy thing is available. Honest in the way that costs something. So when I say that my curiosity about the basement was not suspicion, I mean it precisely. I was not afraid of what I might find. I was simply aware, with the particular awareness of a man who has spent 75 years paying attention to the world, that something was happening in my house that I did not understand. The afternoon I walked downstairs with the key. Eleanor was supposed to be at her archive meeting until 5:30. It was 3:15. I had 2 hours, which was more than I needed. I had not decided fully that I was going to open the safe. I told myself I was simply going downstairs to look at the room, to be in the space and to think. The basement is cool and dry, the way a properly maintained Georgian cellar ought to be. It runs the full length of the house. I had fitted it out years ago with proper shelving along the north wall, and there are boxes up there that have not been opened since our children grew and left, carrying whatever childhood they kept and leaving the rest. The floor is stone flags, original to the house, and they hold the cold in all seasons. The light comes from a single overhead fitting that Eleanor replaced with something warmer a few years back, and it throws a steady amber light across the room that I have always found unexpectedly pleasant for a basement. The safe is behind the old oak cabinet in the far corner. It was always there, and for most of our years in the house, it sat behind that cabinet like a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address and simply never sent back. I moved the cabinet to the left, just far enough. The safe dial was there, and beside the dial, the slot for the key. I put the key in, and the door at the top of the stairs opened. I heard Eleanor before I heard her words. Her step on the stairs is a thing I could identify in a room full of people. The particular rhythm of it, slightly deliberate, unhurried in the way of someone who is comfortable in their own home. And then she was at the bottom of the stairs, and she saw me, and for one long moment, neither of us said anything at all. The quality of that silence. I have been trying to find words for it ever since. Then she said quietly, with her voice doing something I had never heard it do in 49 years of marriage, "Richard, please, do not open it." Not angry, not frightened, heartbroken, as though I were about to break something that could not be put back together, as though the key in my hand were something irreversible. I took the key out of the lock. I straightened up. I looked at her, and Eleanor, who has never once in our marriage looked away from a direct gaze, held my eyes for a long moment, and then looked down at her hands, and something in that small movement, Eleanor Ashcroft, looking at her own hands, told me that whatever was in that safe was something she needed me not to know yet, not ever to not know. Yet. I put the key in my jacket pocket. I walked up the stairs. She made room for me without moving, which is the particular grace of a woman who has spent half a century sharing space with the same man and knows exactly how much room he needs. I went upstairs. I made tea. She came up a few minutes later and sat across from me at the kitchen table, and we talked about her archive meeting and about the weather, which had been doing something characteristically unpredictable across the Dales, and neither of us mentioned the basement. But before we went to bed that night, she put her hand over mine on the kitchen table, and she held it there and she said, "Give me a little more time." That was 3 weeks ago. I have been waiting. Because that is what you do when someone you love with your whole life asks you to wait. You wait. You trust the weight of everything you know about them. You hold the key and you wait. But I'm telling you this story because something happened yesterday that changed the shape of things. and because I have been carrying this for 5 weeks, and a man can only carry a thing alone for so long before he needs to say it out loud to someone who will listen. Eleanor fell asleep in her chair after supper, which she has been doing more often lately. The tiredness that comes not from illness, but from sustained effort, the particular exhaustion of someone who has been working very hard at something they have not told you about. She was asleep with her reading glasses still on and a cup of tea going cold at her elbow, and I sat across from her in the quiet of our sitting room and watched her breathe. And I realized, sitting there, that I had been misreading the expression on her face for months. It was not the tenderness of losing something. It was the concentration of building something. Eleanor was not looking at me as though she were afraid. She was looking at me the way she looked at the collections she cataloged, with the precision and devotion of someone who understood that what they were doing mattered and who was determined to do it properly. Something in my chest moved. I do not know yet what is in that safe, but I begin to understand that it was put there for me, and the understanding of it is more than I know how to carry sitting quietly in our sitting room, with the fire going and the tea cold, and my wife asleep in her chair, and the whole of our 45 years in this house breathing around us. I have the key still. It is on the table beside me right now, and I am going to tell you what I found. But first I need to tell you about Eleanor, about who she is, about what 49 years of marriage to her has meant, and where it has taken me, and what I understand, at 75, that I did not understand when we were young and careless and full of the particular confidence of people who have not yet learned what they stand to lose. Because this story is not about a safe. It is about what a woman does when she loves someone completely and quietly and with her whole capable mind, and she decides to build something that will last. I met Eleanor on a Wednesday afternoon in October of 1972 in the reading room of the Yorkshire Museum Library. I was 28 years old, and I had come in out of the rain without any particular intention of being there. I had been walking along Museum Street, and the sky had simply opened, that particular North Yorkshire rain that comes in sideways off the Ouse and treats an umbrella as a kind of mild suggestion, and the museum was the nearest open door. I ducked inside, stood dripping on the entrance mat, and then, because I was not the kind of man who wasted an afternoon, went looking for something to read. The reading room was on the first floor, and it was warm and high-ceilinged, and smelled of old paper and wood polish, and there was a woman at one of the reading tables who looked up when I came in, and then immediately looked back down at what she was doing, which was the right response. I found a chair near the window and sat down, and after a few minutes I stopped pretending to look at the pamphlet I had picked up and simply watched the rain on the glass and felt the warmth come back into my hands. After about 20 minutes, the woman at the reading table pushed her chair back and gathered her things, and as she passed my chair, she stopped and said, without particular preamble, "Whatever you are looking at out there, it will not improve. It never does in October." And then she left. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. I went back the following Wednesday. She was there. I had brought a book this time, a genuine one, so that I would not look as though I had come for any particular reason. We talked for perhaps 45 minutes about the museum's current exhibition on Georgian domestic life, which Eleanor knew a great deal about, and I knew almost nothing about, and I walked home in the early dark feeling more awake than I had felt in months. I will spare you the courtship in full. It lasted 8 months, and it was the best 8 months of my life up to that point, and at the end of it, Eleanor said yes to the question I'd been building up to for 6 of those months, and we were married on a Saturday in July in St. Olave's Church on Marygate, with a reception at a pub on Gillygate that no longer exists, and 24 guests who are mostly now in their 70s and 80s and scattered across the county. I want you to understand the kind of woman Eleanor Ashcroft is. She is 71, and she is still the clearest thinking person I've ever known. And I say that having spent my professional life around craftsmen who understood their trade at a molecular level, Eleanor reads a situation the way I read a piece of grain. She sees where the stress is. She sees where the solid core runs. She sees what will hold and what will not, and she has, in 49 years, been wrong about almost nothing that mattered. She is also the kind of person who notices things that most people do not notice. The small things. She once told me, years into our marriage, that she believed most unhappiness in long relationships came not from the large failures, but from the accumulated weight of small things that were never acknowledged. The cup of tea made without being asked, the coat picked up off the floor and hung without comment, the errand run quietly so that the other person did not have to think about it. She believed these small things were the actual material of a life together. The load-bearing joints, she called them once, and I told her she was using a woodworking metaphor, and she said she had been married to a cabinet maker for 30 years, and it had left marks. She noticed, sometime in the past year, that I was forgetting things, not in a dramatic way, not in the way that frightens people, in the way that is simply the honest accounting of a 75-year-old brain that has stored 75 years of mornings and conversations and names and errands and journeys, and has perhaps begun to file some of them in places that are not immediately accessible. I forgot a neighbor's name twice in 1 month. I forgot the name of the street where we used to buy our Christmas tree in the years when the children were small. I forgot, on one occasion, whether I had taken my morning tablets, and Eleanor found me standing in the kitchen looking at the pill organizer with a blankness I recognized in myself as something new. She did not make a thing of it. That is not Eleanor's way. She does not catastrophize. She assesses. She looked at what was happening with the same clear attention she brings to a collection of documents no one has touched in 100 years, and she decided, apparently, that what was needed was not alarm but preparation, not grief but work. I know this because of what she built. Let me stop here for a moment, because I imagine some of you listening to this have watched somebody you love go through something similar. The small forgettings that start to add up, the moments when a person reaches for something familiar, and it is not quite where they left it in their memory. If you have lived through that, on either side of it, write to me in the comments. Tell me where you are. Tell me what it was like. These things deserve to be said aloud. Leave me a like if this is reaching you. Subscribe for another story tomorrow. There is always another one here. Eleanor never told me she had noticed. This is important to understand. She is not a woman who withholds information out of fear. She withholds it, when she does, because she has a considered reason for the timing. She would have weighed the telling against the not yet telling and made a deliberate choice. She would have asked herself what I needed most in that period, and she would have concluded, correctly I think, that what I needed was not to be made anxious about my own mind while she was still in the process of building the thing she intended to give me, because she was building something. I understand this now. I have been piecing it together from small evidence over the past weeks, the particular habits of a cabinet maker applied to a domestic mystery, the archive meetings that had grown, gradually, more frequent, the late evenings in her study with the door pulled to, the phone calls with people from our past, old colleagues of hers, neighbors we had not seen in years, friends who had moved away and whose names came through occasionally on the Christmas card list. I had noticed all of these things as they happened, and I had filed each of them under Eleanor being Eleanor, which is to say, Eleanor being busy and purposeful and thoroughly engaged with the world. I had not imagined they were connected. But they were connected. They were all connected to the same project, and the project was in the basement, behind the oak cabinet, in the safe with the brass dial, waiting. Our marriage has not been without difficulty. I want to say that because it would be dishonest not to. 49 years is a long time, and it contains everything. We have had years that were straightforward and good, the kind of years where you look back and cannot identify a single specific crisis, because the overall tone of the year was simply steady and right. We have had years that were genuinely hard. I lost my father in our 17th year of marriage, and my grief for him was not something I knew how to manage, and I was not an easy man to live with for a period of about 18 months. Eleanor carried that without complaint. She gave me room and she gave me time, and she did not pretend the situation was less than it was, or that I was handling it better than I was. We had a difficulty in our 23rd year that I will not describe in full. It was not a betrayal of the kind that comes to mind first. It was a failure of attention on my part, a period when I was so absorbed in a particularly demanding commission, a library installation for a house in the East Riding that required every hour I had for the better part of a year, that Eleanor felt, for a period of months, that she was living alongside someone who was physically present and emotionally somewhere else entirely. She told me this, eventually, in the kitchen of this house on a Sunday morning, with the directness and the controlled precision of someone who has been waiting to say a thing until they can say it without it becoming a weapon. And I heard her, and I changed. That is the architecture of what we have, not perfection, not the romantic fiction of two people who never misunderstand each other, but the real thing, which is two people who have chosen each other continuously across half a century, and who have learned, through the ordinary curriculum of a life together, how to repair the joints that come loose. Our house on St. Mary's knows us. I mean that in the literal, unsentimental way of a man who has spent his working life understanding how spaces hold the lives that fill them. The floors remember where we walk. The kitchen table has held 50 years of breakfasts and arguments and silences and laughter and the particular kind of peace that comes at the end of a day when nothing dramatic happened and nothing dramatic was needed. The sitting room fire has been lit by the same pair of hands, mine, every winter evening for 45 years, and there is a particular smell to the room in November that I will carry with me for as long as I am able to carry anything. Eleanor catalogued all of it. That is what I am beginning to understand. She catalogued our house and our years and our ordinary days with the same methodical care she brought to the historical collection she worked with for 3 decades. She understood, perhaps before I did, that the ordinary material of a life is the rarest thing there is, that a receipt from a bakery on the Shambles from 1979, the bakery where we bought our first loaf of bread after moving in, is an artifact, that a theater program from a production at the Grand Opera House in 1984, the night we left at the interval because Eleanor decided the direction was all wrong and I did not disagree, is a document. That all of it, every ticket and every letter and every shopping list, written in Eleanor's particular precise handwriting, belongs to the history of 2 specific people who lived a specific life in a specific house in a specific city, and that history is worth keeping. It is late on a Thursday evening now. Eleanor is asleep upstairs. The fire is low and the house is quiet and the key is on the side table where I put it when I came down to write this out, to say it to whoever is listening. She asked me for more time, and I have given her that time. But tonight she came home from her archive session in the city with a quietness about her that was different from the quietness of the past 5 weeks, a completed quietness, if that makes sense. The particular stillness of someone who has finished something they have been working on for a very long time. She made supper. We ate it in the kitchen. She talked about a collection she had been cataloging in Helmsley, letters from the 1930s belonging to a family who had lived near the moors, and she described them with the affection she brings to all historical paper, the love of a person who believes that things written down are things given a chance to last. And then she was quiet for a while, and then she looked at me across the kitchen table and she said, "I think I am nearly ready." I did not ask ready for what. I understood. I have understood for 3 weeks. "Take your time," I said, "because that is what you say when you love someone, and they have asked you to wait, and you have been waiting, and you are not sorry for having waited." She nodded, and she looked at me with that expression I have been trying to read for months, and now that I am closer to understanding it, I can see what it is. It is not fear of losing something. It is the expression of someone who is about to give something away, something they have made with great care and great love, and the giving of it will cost them, because it always costs something to hand over a thing you have put your whole heart into, even when the person you are giving it to is the person it was made for. I'm going to find out tomorrow what is in that safe. Eleanor has all but told me so, and I am sitting here now at this kitchen table at close to midnight, with the fire gone out, and the city beyond the windows doing the quiet thing it does when the pubs have closed and the tourists have gone back to wherever they came from, and I am trying to prepare myself. But you cannot prepare yourself for love. That is the thing nobody tells you when you are young and full of confidence about your own readiness. You can build a marriage over 50 years and still find yourself unprepared for what it turns out to contain. The key is on the table. The house is quiet. Eleanor is asleep. And I am a man of 75 who has spent his whole working life understanding how things are made, who is about to discover that the most extraordinary thing built inside this house was built in secret, in a basement, over 6 years, by the woman who chose him, and who has apparently been choosing him, in 100 small and documented ways, every single day of their life together. I will tell you what I find. I will tell you all of it. Subscribe so you are here when I do. Leave me a like if this is reaching something in your chest that you recognize. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Tell me what time it is. Tell me if you have ever had someone love you in a way you did not know until after the fact. Tell me if you have ever been the one who loved that way. I am going downstairs tomorrow, and whatever is waiting behind that door, I already know it is the most important thing in this house. I just do not know yet how to hold it. Eleanor said she was ready on a Sunday evening in April. She said it simply, the way she says most things that matter, without preamble or ceremony, as we were washing up after supper, with the last light of a long spring day, coming through the kitchen window and catching the steam from the washing-up bowl, and making the whole room look briefly golden. She handed me a tea towel and she said, "I think tomorrow, Richard, if you are ready." And then she went back to the dishes, as though she had not just told me that the mystery I had been carrying for 6 weeks was about to end. I dried the plates. I put them away in the cupboard where they have lived for 45 years. I said, "I'm ready." And that was the whole of it. I did not sleep particularly well that night, not from anxiety exactly, because the word for what I felt was not anxiety. It was closer to the feeling I used to get the night before beginning a significant commission, something ambitious, a piece of furniture that was going to require everything I had, where the wood was extraordinary and the design was demanding, and I knew that the next several weeks would test the full depth of what I knew how to do, a kind of gathered alertness, a sense of standing on the edge of something important. Eleanor slept soundly beside me, the way she always does. She has always been a better sleeper than me. She falls asleep within minutes of her head meeting the pillow, a quality I have envied for 49 years and have never managed to acquire myself. I lay beside her in the dark and listened to the house settle and breathe, that particular language of a Georgian townhouse in the small hours, the creak of old timbers, the tick of pipes, the distant occasional sound of the city beyond the bedroom window, someone's footsteps on the pavement of St. Mary's, a bicycle going past with a light that swept briefly across our ceiling. I lay in the dark and I thought about Eleanor, which is not unusual for me, but the thinking had a new quality to it, a new attention. Let me stop here. I need to tell you something before I go further, because what I am about to describe is the kind of mourning that I did not know how to carry alone. And I have been enormously grateful in the weeks since to know that there are people out there listening. If this story is sitting with you tonight, if something about Richard Ashcroft lying awake in a Georgian bedroom in York, thinking about his wife of 49 years is landing somewhere real in your chest, tell me in the comments below. Tell me where you are listening from, what city, what country, and what time is it there, because these stories travel farther than I ever expected. Leave me a like if you are still with me. Subscribe if you have not yet done it, because there is a new story here every single day, and each one carries something honest inside it. I read every comment, every single one. All right, let me take you to the morning. I had been thinking, lying there in the dark, about memory, about the particular way it works in a long marriage, which is different from the way it works in a single life. When you live alone with your memories, they are entirely yours, self-contained, not challenged by any other version of events. But when you share your life with another person for nearly half a century, your memories become a negotiated thing. You remember it this way and she remembers it that way, and the truth of it lives somewhere in the overlap. You become the archivist of each other, and sometimes you discover that your partner has been keeping records you did not know about, attending to corners of the shared life that you had let grow dim. This is what Eleanor had understood that I had not. I had been forgetting things. I knew this. I had known it for a while, in the way that you know a thing before you are willing to say it out loud to yourself. The name of a neighbor I had known for 20 years, coming loose in my mind just when I needed it, and floating there just out of reach. The street where a friend from my carpentry guild had lived, a man I had visited dozens of times. The street suddenly gone as though it had never been stored. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of forgetting that most people over 70 experience, and most doctors will tell you, is within the range of what aging does to the filing system of a human brain. Not alarming, not the beginning of something terrible, simply the ordinary erosion of a mind that has been holding an enormous amount for a very long time. But Eleanor had noticed. Eleanor notices everything. That is who she is, who she has always been. She spent 33 years in a museum archive, where the whole job was noticing, cataloging, preserving, making sure nothing fell through the gaps. She brought that same professional attention home with her every evening for 3.5 decades, and she applied it to our life together with the same care she applied to a collection of Victorian correspondence or a box of Georgian household accounts. Nothing escaped her, and when she began to see the edges of my memory going slightly soft, she had done what Eleanor does when she identifies a problem. She had not panicked. She had not told me, because telling me would only have added anxiety to something that was going to take its own course regardless. She had devised a solution. The morning came eventually. A Monday, mild and overcast in the particular way of April in York, where the spring is never quite certain of itself, and the sky hedges its bets between gray and blue, and usually settles for something in between. Eleanor was up before me, which is always the case, and when I came downstairs, she was at the kitchen table with tea made, and 2 cups set out, and a look on her face that I had to look at for a moment before I understood it. It was the look of someone who has been working on something for a very long time, and is about to hand it over. The tenderness and the anxiety of giving something away that you have put your whole heart into. We did not eat much breakfast. We drank our tea. We talked a little about the day, about the weather, about a book Eleanor had been reading, the ordinary conversational currency of a long marriage on a Monday morning. And then she set down her cup and she said, "Shall we go down?" And I said yes. The basement stairs have always had a particular sound. The 3rd step from the top has a slight creak that I have been meaning to address for 15 years, and have not because it has become part of the house's vocabulary. One of those small imperfections that you stop noticing, and then notice again when the house is very quiet, and you are paying close attention. I noticed it that morning. I noticed every step. I was a cabinet maker for 40 years, and I have always paid attention to the physical world with a specific and particular care. The quality of surfaces, the way things are joined, the small details that reveal the nature of a thing to anyone willing to look closely. Going down those stairs on that April morning, I noticed everything. The way the light fell from the single amber fitting at the bottom, the smell of cool stone and wood, and the faint, faint smell of paper that I had not been aware of before, and that I understand now. The sound of our feet on the old flags at the bottom. Eleanor crossed the room to the far corner and moved the oak cabinet to the left with a practiced efficiency that told me she had done it many times. The brass dial of the safe was there. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and took out her key. She looked at me. I looked at her. Then she unlocked the safe and opened the door and stepped back. I came forward and I looked inside. The safe is not large. It never needed to be. When we installed it, we were thinking of documents, of the deeds to the house, of the few pieces of jewelry that had come down through Eleanor's family, of the passports and the important papers that every household accumulates over the years. It had held those things perfectly adequately for 3 decades, and then gradually, I had assumed, stopped being necessary as we moved our documents online and our important papers into a filing system in the study. It had not stopped being necessary. It had become something else entirely. The envelopes were stacked in the most meticulous order I have ever seen outside a professional archive, which is appropriate, because the person who organized them was a professional archivist, and she had applied the full force of 33 years of professional expertise to the organization of these contents. They were numbered, each one in Eleanor's precise and particular handwriting. The hand of someone who had spent decades writing catalog entries with care bore a number and a brief notation. The numbers went from 1 to what I could see was, at minimum, several hundred. They were arranged in sequence in a series of small archival boxes, the kind Eleanor uses for her volunteer work, acid-free, designed for long-term preservation. And beside the envelopes, in what space remained, were small, carefully labeled objects, not many of them, but present. A pressed flower, a theater program, a folded piece of paper that I recognized as a drawing I had made in the first year of our marriage, when we were planning the layout of this very kitchen, a small flat stone from a beach in Northumberland, where we had spent a week the summer after we were married. I stood there and looked at all of it, and I could not speak. Eleanor put her hand on my arm. She said, "I was going to finish before I showed you. I am almost finished. There are only a few more months still to do." She paused. "I started keeping records about 6 years ago. 1 envelope for each significant day. 1 for each ordinary day that I knew we would want to remember. I asked people to write letters. Friends, neighbors, some of your old customers from the workshop. People whose lives you touched without knowing it. I have been recording things myself. Memories I wanted to make sure we kept. The ones I was afraid might slip away." She was not looking at me while she said this. She was looking at the envelopes. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were very bright, and she said, "I did not hide it, because I was ashamed of it. I hid it, because I knew that if you found out you would want to help, and I needed to catalog it properly first. You would have gone straight to the ones that were not yet finished. You know how you are." I did know how I was. She had me entirely right. She reached into the safe and she took out the first envelope. Number 1. She handed it to me. I opened it. Inside was a receipt, a till receipt from a bakery that used to stand on Goodrum Gate, 2 streets from where we live. It was dated the 14th of September, 1978, the date we moved into this house. The receipt was for 1 small white loaf, 1 wholemeal bloomer, and 2 Chelsea buns, and it came to 63 pence, and the ink had faded to a soft brown, but it was entirely legible. On the back of the receipt, in Eleanor's handwriting, she had written, "First grocery shop in our house." We ate the Chelsea buns standing in the kitchen, because there was nowhere to sit yet. Richard got icing on his shirt immediately, and did not notice until supper. It was raining. I remember thinking I had never been so happy in my entire life. I held that receipt for a very long time. Then Eleanor said, quietly, the way she says things when they matter most, "I never wanted us to only remember the biggest days. The ordinary ones built our whole life." I have been trying to find adequate words for what happened to me in that moment, for the weeks since it happened, and I cannot fully do it, which is unusual for me because I am not a man who is typically at a loss. I will say this, in 49 years of marriage I have been moved by Eleanor many times. I have been surprised by her, delighted by her, comforted by her, occasionally and thoroughly exasperated by her, always in the way of deep familiarity, the way you can only be exasperated by someone you know so completely that their patterns are yours as well. I have loved her continuously, and with gratitude for so long, that the love is no longer something I identify separately from the rest of my experience. It is simply the weather I live in. But in that moment, standing in the cool, amber light of our basement, holding a receipt from a bakery that has not existed for 20 years, written on the back, in the hand of the woman who has shared my life, and who apparently has been paying closer attention to that shared life than I ever fully understood, something happened that I do not entirely know how to describe. It was not a breaking. It was closer to a completion, like a joint coming perfectly together in a piece of furniture you have been building for a very long time. I sat down on the stone floor of the basement, which is not something a 75-year-old man does without some consideration of how he is going to get back up again, and I looked at the receipt, and I did not say anything for several minutes. Eleanor sat down beside me, which was also not something either of us did lightly, and she put her hand over mine, and we sat there on the cold flags of our basement with several hundred numbered envelopes above our heads in their archival boxes, and the house settled around us with its familiar language of old timber, and old plaster and old lives lived warmly, and neither of us needed to say anything at all. Eventually, I said, "How many?" She said, 347 so far. I want to finish to the end of this year. Then I was going to give you the key. I looked at her. You were going to give me the key. She said, it was always going to be for both of us. I just needed to finish it properly first. She paused. You know how I am. I did know how she was. She had me entirely right, as she nearly always did. We sat there for a long time. The amber light held us. The stone was cold, but neither of us moved, and I began to understand, in the gradual way that large understandings arrive, what Eleanor had actually done. She had not built a monument. She had not built a museum or a memorial, or any kind of structure that looked backwards with the weight of something finished. She had built a lifeline. She had seen me beginning, very gently and very slowly, to lose my grip on the smaller details of a life I loved, and she had done what Eleanor does with everything she loves. She had archived it. She had made sure it would last. 347 envelopes, each one a day, each one a moment. The significant ones and the ordinary ones, because Eleanor, who spent her professional life understanding that the ordinary is the most important record there is, knew precisely that it was the ordinary days that built the extraordinary life. I said, Eleanor, how long has it taken you? She thought about this. The serious work started about 3 years ago. The idea started before that. Around the time I noticed you forgot Arthur Pemberton's name. You had known Arthur for 25 years, and his name just left you for a moment, and I saw your face when it came back. I started thinking about it then. Arthur Pemberton, our neighbor on the other side, the retired headmaster who keeps pigeons and grows vegetables in his back garden with a seriousness that borders on the religious. I had known him since the year we moved in, and one Tuesday afternoon on the pavement outside the house, I had reached for his name and felt it go briefly absent, the way a familiar word sometimes goes absent in the middle of a sentence, and it had come back a few seconds later, but the sensation, the particular disorientation of reaching for something that should be immediately present and finding it temporarily elsewhere, had registered on my face in a way that Eleanor had read and remembered and acted upon. 6 years of action, 3 years of serious construction, 347 envelopes and counting. I thought about the phone calls I had half heard from the sitting room, the evenings in the study with the door pulled to, the archive meetings that had grown more frequent because Eleanor had been requesting the particular kinds of materials, the acid-free boxes, the archival envelopes, the specialist storage supplies, through the contacts she had made over 33 years in the field, and had needed time to collect them and to organize the work that went into each envelope, the writing, the gathering of letters from friends and former colleagues and neighbors, the recording of her own voice on small, clear cards that she had placed inside certain envelopes and that I had not yet found, but that she described now, her voice telling a story about a specific day or a specific journey, or a specific ordinary Wednesday that she wanted us both to be able to find again if the filing of memory became less reliable. I reached up and took envelope number 2 from its place at the top of the first archival box. Eleanor watched me. On the front of the envelope, in her handwriting, it said, "The evening of the 19th of November, 1978. Tea by the fire. First winter here." I looked at her. "Open it," she said. Inside was a small piece of paper on which Eleanor had written a paragraph, a description of an evening in our first autumn in this house, when the heating was still unreliable, and we had lit a fire in the sitting room and sat beside it on the floor because the furniture had not yet arrived, eating toast, reading, not talking very much, entirely content. She described the exact quality of the firelight, the particular smell of a fire in a room that has not had one lit in it for many years, the sound of rain on the Georgian windows, the feeling, which she said she had never forgotten, of knowing that this was home. I had no memory of that specific evening. I must have been there. I was certainly there. But 45 years is a long time, and the specific evenings blur and merge, the ordinary evenings, the ones without ceremony, the ones that did not announce themselves as significant. Eleanor had kept it. She had held it in her memory for 45 years, with the precision of a woman who understood from the beginning that the ordinary evening was the one most likely to be lost. And when she saw the edges of my recall beginning to soften, she had written it down. I want to stop here, because what I am about to tell you about what was in those boxes, about the letters from old friends and former customers and neighbors, about the recordings Eleanor made, and the objects she kept, and the receipts and the theater programs and the pressed flowers and the handwritten shopping lists and the train tickets from journeys we had taken across Yorkshire and beyond. All of it is going to take more than one sitting to tell you properly, and there are people I know are out there right now who have something to say about what I have just described. If you have ever had someone love you in a way you did not know about until it was shown to you, if you have ever been surprised by the depth of another person's quiet attention to your life, write to me in the comments below. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is where you are listening from. Tell me what you want to tell me, because I am listening, and I read every word. And leave me a like if this story is landing somewhere real. Subscribe if you are not yet with me, because there is a new one of these every single day, and I have more to tell you about envelope number 1 and what came after it. All right, let me keep going. The letters. I had not known about the letters. This was perhaps the discovery that affected me most deeply, more than the receipts and the ticket stubs and the theater programs, more even than the recordings of Eleanor's voice describing days I had half forgotten or entirely forgotten. The letters were from other people, people who were not Eleanor and who had nonetheless written, at Eleanor's request, about me. Let me be precise about this, because it requires precision. Eleanor had contacted, over the course of 3 years, somewhere between 40 and 50 people whose lives had intersected with mine across the decades. Former customers of the workshop, neighbors from our street and from streets we had lived on before this one, friends from the university where Eleanor worked before she moved to the museum, where she had occasionally brought me to departmental events, and where I had apparently made impressions I had no idea I had made, members of the carpentry guild I belonged to for 30 years, 2 men who had worked alongside me in my early years in the trade, a woman from the village outside the city where we had spent weekends for 15 years, before her husband died, and the house was sold, people I had helped in practical ways, with furniture, with repairs, with the kind of assistance that a man who works with his hands extends naturally to the people around him, without recording it as anything significant. Eleanor had written to each of them and asked them to describe a memory of me, a specific moment or exchange, something I had done that had mattered to them. She had told them it was for a private family archive, and asked them to be specific rather than general, and they had written back. The letters were extraordinary, not because they said extraordinary things, but because of the opposite, because they were specific and ordinary in exactly the way Eleanor had asked them to be. A former customer described the afternoon in 1991, when I had spent 3 additional hours on a piece I had already been paid for, because I was not satisfied with the drawer fitting and I had not told him I was staying late. He had simply arrived to collect the piece and found me still there. A neighbor described the year her husband was ill, when I had quietly organized the collection from the dustbin at the road end and returned it to her gate every week for 4 months without mentioning it. A man from the Guild wrote about a conversation we had had in 1987 at the Guild annual dinner, a conversation I had no memory of, in which I had apparently said something about the dignity of making things by hand that he had never forgotten and that he had passed on to his own apprentices. I sat on the basement floor, and I read those letters one by one with Eleanor beside me, and I felt something that I am not going to try to name, precisely because I am not sure the precise name for it exists in the language. It was not vanity. It was something more uncomfortable and more important than vanity. It was the recognition that a life has an effect on other lives that the person living it is almost entirely unaware of. That the things you do on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the extra hours in the workshop, the quiet assistance with the dustbin, the conversation at a dinner table that you do not remember, ripple outward in ways you cannot see from where you are standing, and that Eleanor had spent 3 years collecting evidence of those ripples and sealing them in archival envelopes and placing them in a safe in our basement, so that if the day came when I could not find the ordinary Tuesday in my own memory, I could find it here. She had done all of this without a word, without acknowledgement, without asking for anything in return. She had done it the way she did everything that mattered to her, with complete and methodical devotion, in the early mornings before I came downstairs, in the evenings in her study, in the afternoons when I was in the workshop and she was supposed to be reading or gardening or doing any of the ordinary things a retired woman does on a Tuesday afternoon, but was actually writing letters to a woman in a village outside York, asking her to describe a specific memory of her husband's old friend, the cabinet maker. I looked at her sitting beside me on the cold stone floor, with her knees drawn up and her hands in her lap and her silver hair catching the amber light, and I thought about the October afternoon in the reading room of the Yorkshire Museum 52 years ago, when a woman at a reading table had looked up when I came in, and then looked immediately back down at her work, and I thought about how much has happened since then, and how little of it I would have chosen to do without her. And I thought that if there is any justice in the accounting of a life, the years I have been given alongside Eleanor Ashcroft have put me so far into credit that nothing that comes after could possibly balance the books. I said, "You should not have done all this alone." She said, "I know you, Richard. If I had told you, you would have insisted on helping, and then you would have found things before I had finished preparing them. And I wanted it to be right. How does a person even begin to thank you for something like this?" She considered this seriously, the way Eleanor always considers a question seriously before answering it. Then she said, "You could start by making tea. My knees are going to complain about this floor for a week." I laughed. Sitting on the cold flags of our basement with my wife of 49 years and several hundred numbered envelopes and the accumulated evidence of an ordinary, extraordinary life, I laughed the particular laugh that is both laughter and something else, something that has been held in the chest for a long time and finally found its way out. Eleanor laughed too, and we helped each other up, slowly, with the careful consideration of 2 people in their 70s who have learned to be realistic about what their bodies will and will not do without complaint, and we went upstairs and I made the tea. We have been opening 1 envelope each Sunday evening since the end of April. It was Eleanor's idea to pace it that way, which was right, as her ideas generally are. She pointed out, with the practical clarity of the professional archivist, that the collection had been built over years and deserved more than a single afternoon of discovery, and that if we opened everything at once, we would lose the particular quality of each individual piece, the way a museum exhibition needs space around each object, so that the eye can properly attend to it. 1 Sunday per week, 1 envelope, an hour or so, sometimes more, sometimes less. whatever the envelope contained and wherever it took us. I want to tell you about some of what we have found, because the story of what Eleanor built is not complete without the specific contents, and the specific contents are the thing. Envelope number 7 is a small cardboard square on which Eleanor wrote a description of a Saturday morning in the spring of our 3rd year in the house, when I had decided, without particular planning, to build a window box for the kitchen window. The project was not complex by the standards of my trade, but I had evidently approached it with a seriousness disproportionate to its scale, because Eleanor's description of the day is primarily a description of me spending 4 hours on a window box that by any reasonable standard should have taken one, measuring and remeasuring, adjusting the joints, planing a surface until it was exactly right, and then sitting back and looking at it with the particular satisfaction of a man who has made something properly. She wrote, at the end of her description, that she had not understood until that Saturday what it meant to make something with complete attention, that she had thought before then that my care with the workshop pieces was professional seriousness, and that what she saw on that Saturday morning was that it was also, simply, who I was, and that understanding it had made her love me more than she had the day before. Envelope number 23 contains a letter from a woman named Patricia Haverstock, whose late husband, Thomas, had commissioned a set of bedroom furniture from me in the late 1980s, a project I remember clearly because the timber was a particularly beautiful piece of English walnut that I had been holding for the right commission. Patricia wrote to say that after Thomas died, she had gone back to that bedroom every evening for 2 years, and that the furniture had been a comfort in a way she had not been able to fully explain to herself until she understood that something made with genuine care retains the quality of that care, that you can feel it in a thing, and that being in a room full of such things when she was at her most lost had made her feel less alone. She thanked me. She said she was grateful to the man who made something beautiful for her husband, and who had therefore, without knowing it, made something that helped her survive the worst years of her life. I had never known any of this. She had never told me. Thomas had never told me. There was no way for me to have known it. And now I know it. At 75, from an archival envelope on a Sunday evening in April. And the knowing of it is something I will carry for whatever years remain. Let me stop right there, because I want to ask you something and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. Has a person ever done something for you? Something quiet and unremarkable? Something they almost certainly did not think twice about after they did it, that stayed with you for years and that you have never told them about? Something that made a difference when you needed one and that the person who made it has no idea they made. Write about it in the comments below. Tell me what it was, if you want to, and tell me where you are, because this conversation is happening across distances I find genuinely remarkable, and I want to know the geography of it. Leave me a like if this story has been sitting with you. Subscribe if you have not yet done it, because I have more Sundays to tell you about, and a new story here every single day. And now let me get back to what was in those envelopes. Envelope number 41 is a recording, Eleanor's voice, on a small, clear card, describing a holiday we took in the autumn of 1990, a week in the Scottish Highlands at a small hotel outside Inverness that neither of us had been to before or since. She describes, in specific and careful detail, the color of the light on Loch Ness in the early morning, the particular smell of the hotel dining room, the walk we took along the shore on the Wednesday afternoon when it rained and we had no umbrellas, and we walked anyway because we had come this far, and the rain was not, Eleanor said, as bad as it looked from inside. She describes a conversation we had at dinner on the Thursday evening that I will not repeat in full because it is ours, but that touched on things we had not talked about directly in years, the kind of conversation that long marriages sometimes find at last when the noise of the working years has died down enough to let the deeper things surface. She says on the recording, her voice measured and precise and entirely Eleanor, that she has thought about that dinner conversation in Inverness many times in the years since, that she thought about it as one of the moments in which she understood most clearly who she had chosen and why she had been right to choose him. I listened to that recording 3 times on the Sunday evening we opened envelope number 41. Eleanor sat beside me and listened with me each time, as though hearing her own voice from 25 years earlier was also, for her, a form of discovery. I want to tell you about the project as a whole, about the architectural understanding of what Eleanor built, because she is an architect as much as she is an archivist, and the structure of the collection is as deliberate as its contents. She organized it, she explained to me across several Sunday evenings, as we worked through the early envelopes, on a principle she borrowed from her professional work. In a museum archive, the principle is called contextual layering, which means that an object is not stored alone, but always alongside the documents and materials that give it meaning. A Victorian button is not simply a button. It is a button alongside the account book that records its purchase, the diary entry that describes the garment it fastened, the letter from the person who wore that garment on a significant occasion. The button and its context together constitute a record. The button alone is only a button. Eleanor applied this to us. An envelope is not simply a receipt, or a letter, or a pressed flower. It is those things alongside her written description of the context, the day, the people, the weather, the conversation, the quality of the light, the smell of the room, the particular emotional atmosphere of the moment. Each envelope contains a thing and its story, and because Eleanor is who she is, the stories are precise, not the general impression, the specific detail. She had kept notes. For years before she began the serious work of the collection, she had kept a private notebook in which she had written down, briefly, the details of days and occasions and moments that she wanted to ensure she could reconstruct accurately later. These notes were then drawn on when she began building the envelopes, so that the descriptions are not reconstructions from distant memory, but transcriptions of details caught close to the time. I had not known about the notebook. I had not known about any of it. The discretion required to keep this from a man you have shared a life with for 49 years, the careful management of timing and location, and the natural rhythms of a shared domestic life, is itself a remarkable thing. Eleanor had done it with complete success, and I say this with admiration that is professional as much as personal, because I understand what sustained concealment of a project requires in terms of attention and management. There are letters from people I had lost touch with. A man from the Guild named Gerald Ashby, who retired and moved to Cornwall 15 years ago and with whom I exchanged Christmas cards annually, wrote about a disagreement we had in the early 1990s over a commission we had briefly discussed collaborating on, a piece that was eventually never made. The disagreement had been small and had been resolved within a week, and I had remembered it only vaguely. Gerald's letter describes it differently from the way I remembered it. He says that what he has never forgotten was not the disagreement, but what happened after. When I had come back to him a few days later and said, simply, that I had been wrong about the joint design we had argued over and that his approach was better. He says that in 40 years of working in the trade, he had encountered almost no one who acknowledged being wrong in that particular way, directly and without cushioning, and that it had raised his estimation of me permanently and had shaped his understanding of what professional integrity looked like. I sat with that letter for a long time. The argument itself was nothing. The furniture was never made. The whole episode had been entirely minor in the accounting of my professional life, and yet Gerald Ashby had kept it for 30 years as an example of something he valued, and Eleanor had known to ask him for it. There is an envelope, number 62, that contains something I did not expect. It is a letter from Eleanor's sister Margaret, who is 4 years younger than Eleanor and who lives in Bath, and who I have always got on with in the comfortable, unremarkable way of a man who likes his wife's family without having anything particular to say about them. Margaret's letter is not about a thing I did. It is about Eleanor, about what Eleanor was like in the years before she met me and in the years after, and about what Margaret understood the difference to be. It is, in the most personal terms, the most extraordinary letter in the collection, and I am going to say only this about it, that it made Eleanor cry when we read it, and that Eleanor does not cry easily, and that I sat beside her and held her hand while she finished reading it, and that when she was done, she folded it very carefully and put it back in its envelope and said, "Margaret always did have better words than me." And I said, "Nobody has better words than you." And she said, "That is extremely kind, but also entirely untrue." And we sat quietly for a while in the sitting room with the fire going and the spring evening outside the window and the whole of a life between us. There is a shopping list, envelope number 87, a handwritten shopping list in my own handwriting, from a time I cannot date precisely, but that I place in the 1980s from the prices, a list that covers bread and milk and potatoes and butter, and something that I apparently wrote as the good marmalade, underlined, presumably because there had been a dispute about which marmalade was the good one, and the underlining was meant to settle it. Eleanor wrote on the enclosed card that she had kept this shopping list because of the underlining, because she had thought about it in the weeks after she found it tucked into a drawer and understood that the underlining was not about marmalade at all. It was about care, about a man who, going to the shops on an ordinary Thursday, had thought about the marmalade question and had added the word good and then underlined it because he wanted to make sure he got the right one. The small, domestic, entirely unremarkable act of caring that happens 1,000 times in a long marriage and is never recorded as significant because it happens constantly, and constantly is not how significant things are measured. Eleanor measured it. 347 envelopes, each one an argument made in archival evidence for the proposition that ordinary is not the opposite of extraordinary. That ordinary is where the extraordinary actually lives, if you know how to look. I have been thinking about Eleanor's understanding of this for weeks now. She spent her professional life with historical documents, with the materials that survive from lives long finished, and what the archive teaches, if you work in it long enough, is that the surviving materials are almost never the ones the people who created them thought significant. The formal documents, the legal records, the letters written for posterity, the memoirs, these are the materials people thought would matter. What actually matters, to the historian and the archivist, is the shopping list, the household account book, the note tucked into a drawer, the receipt from a bakery, the evidence of the ordinary days, because the ordinary days are the days a life is actually made of, and the ordinary materials are the ones that tell you who a person actually was, when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. Eleanor knew this from 33 years of professional practice, and she applied it to us. She built an archive of our ordinary materials, our receipts and our shopping lists, and our theater programs and our pressed flowers, because she understood that in 20 or 30 or 40 years, these materials, with their context carefully annotated in her precise handwriting, would tell the story of who we were to each other more truly than any formal account ever could. She built this for me. She built it because she saw me beginning to lose access to the materials in my own memory, and she could not bear the idea that those materials would simply be gone, that the ordinary days would fade and leave nothing behind. So she preserved them, as she had preserved so many other people's ordinary days across 33 years, with the same care and the same expertise, but with the addition of something that no professional archive can contain, which is the love of a person who was there for every single one of those days, and who decided, quietly, and without making a fuss about it, that they would not be lost. One Sunday evening in early June, we came to an envelope that Eleanor had marked differently from the others. Instead of a number and a brief notation, it bore only the words for later, written in the particular handwriting she uses when she is being very precise and very deliberate. She had not mentioned it. I took it from the box. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it, and I read in Eleanor's hand the following. She had written, "If you are reading this, then I have decided the time is right, and the collection is ready, and I have given you the key, or you have found the other key, which I have known about since approximately 1983, when I was looking for a chisel in your toolbox and came across it in the chamois cloth, and decided not to mention it, because it seemed like the kind of thing a person might want to believe they had kept secret. Either way, you are here. I want you to know 3 things. The first is that I am not frightened. Of what comes next for either of us, I mean. I have watched you forget small things, and I have been quietly terrified, and I have been angry about being terrified, because there is nothing useful in terror, and I am not a woman who sees the point of anything that is not useful. And then I decided to do something useful instead. This is that useful thing. The second is that I did not build this to make you sad. I built it because I know that you love the ordinary days. You always have. You are the only person I have ever known who was genuinely, entirely content to be exactly where he was. A Tuesday evening in the kitchen with bad weather outside and good food on the table, and 45 years of ordinary Tuesdays behind you. That contentment is, I think, the best thing about you. This collection is made of Tuesdays. I hope that is right. The third is this. I have kept 2 keys to this safe for 45 years. One was mine, and one was yours. I would like you to have both of them. The collection belongs to both of us. I looked up from the letter. Eleanor was watching me. Her hands were in her lap, and her face was the face I have been looking at for 52 years. All the expressions I know, and underneath them, all the particular Eleanor expression that means she is waiting to see how something lands before she decides what to say next. I said, "You knew about the second key?" She said, "Since 1983. I said, "You let me think it was a secret." She said, "You seem to want it to be a secret. I saw no reason to deprive you of that." And there it was. Of course, Eleanor, who notices everything and files everything and attends to everything and has apparently been attending to my illusion of the secret second key for 42 years, with the same care she attends to everything else, had let me keep it because she is the kind of person who understands that some small secrets are not deceptions, they are small dignities, and she would not have taken mine from me for anything. I reached into my jacket pocket and I took out the key that I had been carrying for 6 weeks. I held it in my palm. It was small and cold and heavy in the way old brass goes heavy. And I looked at it for a moment, and I thought about all the things it had represented to me over those 6 weeks. The mystery, the worry, the particular lonely weight of a question you are not yet allowed to answer. And then I thought about what it was actually a key to. I held it out to Eleanor. She looked at it. Then she took her own key from the pocket of her cardigan and placed them both in my palm together, side by side. She said, "I told you. The collection belongs to both of us." I closed my hand around both keys. Outside the sitting room windows, the June evening was doing what June evenings in York do when they are at their best, which is to go on, long and golden, the northern light lasting until 10 o'clock, and the city beyond the glass settling into the particular evening warmth of a day that has been generous with its sunshine. The house was quiet in the way it is quiet on a Sunday evening, the comfortable quiet of a place that is used to 2 people in it, who do not need to fill the silence. The fire was not lit because we had not needed it since March, but the grate was clean, and the mantelpiece had on it the same objects it has had on it for 30 years. The small clock, the photograph from Eleanor's retirement, the piece of pale limestone I picked up on a walk along the wharf one afternoon in the early 90s, because the shape of it pleased me. Eleanor was beside me with her hands in her lap, and the 2 keys in my hand and the collection in the basement below us, 347 envelopes and everything they contained, waiting. If you have been with me for all of this, I am glad. And I want to ask you one last thing before I finish. If what I have told you tonight about Eleanor, and the envelopes and the ordinary days built into extraordinary evidence, if any of it put you in mind of someone in your own life, someone who loves you in ways you may not fully know about, or someone whose quiet attention to your life you may not have fully acknowledged, then this is the time. Do not wait for a safe in a basement. Do not wait for 6 weeks of wondering. Tell them. Write to me in the comments below and tell me where you are, and what time it is there, and what you want to say, and then go and say it to the person who deserves to hear it. Leave me a like if this has been an evening worth spending with an old cabinet maker from York. Subscribe, because there's a new story here every single day, and I believe the next one has something true in it that someone out there needs to hear tonight. And please share this with whoever you think could use it, because these stories go where they are needed, and you might be the one who puts it in front of the right person at exactly the right moment. Keeper, if you made it all the way through, that is the word. Leave it in the comments, and I will know you really listened. Thank you. Take care of each other out there.